By way of introduction, I'm pretty excited. And this evolved because I've been a professional coach since '97. And one of the things that I wanted to learn is tied to my company, Action Learning Associates. So I wanted to find out, is there a competitive advantage for leader development? And particularly, this came from clients who asked, is there such an advantage? And so that's kind of what sparked it. And I want to thank these three fine people. You just heard from Dr. Sherry Hill, who's in Chicago, and Dr. Lonnie Morris is today near Philadelphia. They are on the faculty at the Chicago School, and if your students looking for committee members, I will endorse them. And Dr. John Maddox is famous and works for Gartner, is a research statistician type person. He's prolific, and he happens to live near me in Franklin, Tennessee, near Nashville, and keeps me going. So thank you also, and welcome to the faculty and students and guests who might be on this call. Here's the outline of what I intend to discuss. I think I've got, what, 15 minutes for each of these? No, I'm teasing. So that's where we're going. Familiar format, perhaps, if you've read a dissertation. So here's some background about the professional coaching industry, the sort of practical side. You may know that that industry is estimated at over 53,500 global coach practitioners and over $7 billion in annual revenue. There are now actually 120 accredited coach training programs in the ICF. And the obstacles that they've articulated in one of their most recent surveys for coaching are untrained individuals and marketplace confusion. The bottom line is, in order to be a quote professional coach, all you need is a business card. And I think that's tragic. I've been doing this work for over 20 years and managing coaches globally. So I wanted to explore this. The top future opportunities for coaching are, they've defined, increased awareness of the benefits of coaching. What am I getting out of this investment? And secondly, what's the data? Show me the numbers for return on investment or return on expectations or outcomes. So you'll hear the word outcome and outcome-based coaching a lot in the next 25 minutes. Also, there are many professional consultants or coaches who simply don't adhere to evidence-based protocols. It could be because of ignorance. It could be because they're not obliged to do so with something like a protocol. So what do the academics say related to this background? There's plenty of research, and my endeavor here is to stand on both sides of the river with academic and practical perspectives to provide a bridge. Leaders often struggle to balance performance outcomes and individual well-being. I've met both of these authors. They're luminaries, Kim Cameron and Marty Seligman. And there's countless others who would say the same thing. There's strong evidence that the best leaders maximize the strengths of others rather than their weaknesses or competency gaps. These guys are famous, Kouzes and Pausner, but there are plenty of others. If you've been a manager or have practical experience as a parent, you might know that it's important sometimes to maximize the strengths of others. Third bullet, there's related evidence on the significance of short interventions in strength-based executive coaching on goal attainment. McKee and Grant are two of the best researchers that I've found, and Grant's work in organizational change is tremendous. So I replicated that design. You'll see some details in a minute. So the outcomes of those coaches, sadly, are not always measured. They're not always associated with that theoretical framework. And I just cited, 4 sources here, but that leads to the problem. So there's always a gap, right, between practice and theory. And I suppose everybody doing a defense will say that there's a gap. But that gap exists here because positive psychology coaching, PPC, you'll hear that acronym again, lacks rigorous measurement. It lacks evidence-based protocols, and it lacks standard processes. So what do I mean? The definition is here by one of the most prolific authors, Biswas Diener, which I've adopted. The practice of positive psychology coaching means that we're going to focus on what's right. We're going to focus on positive emotions. How does it feel to interact or be in that relationship or that engagement with that coach and that coachee? And what are the signature strengths, particularly of the coachee, to help maximize that person's outcomes? This is a shift in psychology. The purpose of this quasi-experimental study was to assess the relationship, if there is any, between positive psychology coaching protocols And I'll speak to the word protocols more specifically later. But the word protocol is not typically associated with coaching. Uh, it's evolving, it's emerging, and I think is a critical association. Anyways, PPC protocols that are applied by global professional coaches. I didn't just want to look at a certain geography or region, and I wanted to look at the perceived performance or behavioral outcomes of leaders. In other words, what are you getting out of this investment? So that led to the overall research question and 3 sub-questions, which I'll address in turn. Overall, what's the relationship between positive psychology coaching protocols applied by people who call themselves, self-identify as professional coaches and meet the 6 inclusion criteria that I had for this research? What's the relationship between those protocols and performance or behavioral outcomes of leaders? And the sub-questions relate in 3 sort of cascading ways. The first is, does participation have any effect on leader outcomes? The second, what about protocols? Is there a relationship between those protocols and leader outcomes? And third, how about compliance? Compliance is critical in, for instance, healthcare and law and finance, but is it important in leader development? So those are the key questions where I'm going. It was a challenge to get enough people to participate. I knew that this was going to be a challenge. So I started out with 5,570 global professional coaches from 2 professional organizations. The ICF, the International Coaching Federation, has a research panel, and that was tremendous. You'll see the demographic data in just a minute. And CoachSource, which is the largest global provider of executive coaching. I thought if I could leverage these 2 organizations, it should be fairly easy to attract a significant number. It wasn't easy. Then I asked those folks to respond to this question. I wanted to create 2 randomly matched groups based on the extent to which your current coaching practice includes positive psychology practices. So I defined it and then asked, to what extent do you do these things? Third bullet, those in the upper half were assigned and called Group A, and they were encouraged to implement some positive psychology coaching digital program content, including something that I trademarked called AD-FITT, and I'll speak to the details of that in a moment. AD-FITT evolved because of client requests. They essentially asked, how do you operationalize this? And those are the 5 pieces of AD-FITT. Those in the lower half were assigned to Group B, and they received a standard coaching digital program content, similar in length. So from a collection perspective, I was limited in some ways, ethically and professionally. I only asked coaches, not coachees, to participate in the study. And I emailed invitations directly, with permission, obviously, from those organizations to minimize any potential researcher bias. You're familiar probably with these protocols. Participants were randomly assigned a user ID, and confidentiality was maintained using SurveyMonkey software. And the invitation explicitly stated that participation in the study was voluntary and anonymous, and there was no benefit or liability for those who chose not to participate. It was critical to me to maintain the confidentiality and autonomy that most coaches are accustomed to, without getting in the way of encouraging them to respond. And I was worried about numbers, so I wrote that additional participants were also invited using snowball techniques and social media until at least 200 participants were included. That was my intention, and I used LinkedIn invitations, and here's what the design looked like. So Group A minimally needed 26 people. Group B minimally needed 26. Note that the instruments at time 1 and time 2 are identical. So both groups took 2 validated assessments. The first is called the Psychological Capital Questionnaire, PCQ. It has 12 items. It was thought to change over time, so I wanted to do it at time 2, which is 90 days later, 3 months. At time 1, I also used the values in action via 72 survey. And if anybody's interested in positive psychology, I'll steer you to viacharacter.org, which provides this assessment at no cost. And for researchers, they're very easy to work with. And at the end of the study, 90 days later, and I used 90 days because it replicated another design from Grant, I wanted to ask, well, what are the outcomes you're getting from this survey? So those are the assessments. So back a bit to the treatment. Half of the population, if you recall, this is the group that said, I'm inclined to use positive psychology coaching a little bit more. That was group A. And they received access to digital links, took about 60 minutes. Group B was lower in self-declaring that they use positive psychology coaching in their practice. And they received a similarly length set of links, digital training, and standard coaching methodology. For all of them, that would have been in Group B, that would have been kind of a reminder of good practices that they had adopted. So that was the design. Best of intentions. Here we go. Before the study, I thought I needed over 200 participants. If you look at the far left side, the total sample size, I thought I needed maybe 200, and there were some compelling reasons for that. But the point of including this slide is for the students. I encourage you strongly to use the methodologists at the Chicago School. After 3 meetings with them and probably 2 meetings with Dr. Maddox, I was able to determine that all I needed was an A-Nova to do an F-test, a repeated measure within and between interactions test between these two groups, the low and the high compliance. And the measurements were between T1 and T2. And that reduced the number of required participants down to 52, which is remarkable and wonderful and encouraging. So I mentioned that as a point of learning for any students in the call. So what did I learn and who took part? In the demographic data at time 1 was distributed this way. 62% were female, 37% were males. There were 220 participants in this who responded to this item, the gender distribution item. And their age was fairly mature. These were 53.4-year-olds on average, and 175 people responded to the demographic question. I was delighted by that. I should add maybe that the minimum age, one of the inclusion criteria is to have a minimum age of 21. And there was a cohort question that asked, are you in the next cohort down, ages 20 to 29? But there were none, or 21 to 29, but there were none in this population. So I don't know what that means, but they were chronologically mature people. Who came from, mostly that larger slice of pie, is from the International Coaching Federation's research panel. 72% of them represent those 125 participants. I'm delighted that they participated for a number of reasons. The second largest group are people who followed up from my LinkedIn invitation to participate. So I had 3,000, I think, names in LinkedIn. A fraction of them would have been coaches. I don't know how many, but thankfully 24 participated in this study. I was a little disappointed that the Coach Source affiliation group was smaller than that. There are over 1,200 professional coaches globally distributed, and yet only 10 participated in this study. So those are some of the demographics. I also wanted geographic representation. So the question here was, what's your primary geographic location? Some folks may have multiple locations, but I wanted to obtain a global population with a high degree of cultural variability. And you can see, I hope, the percentages here. 51% were from North America. That's 89 participants. There were 176 responses to this item. 21% of them, or 37, were from North America. So as you'd expect, 72% were from North America and Europe. I should add maybe the other category is from Oceania and Africa and the Middle East. So it's kind of fun to think about the world getting smaller and the sample including some good geographic representation. I like that. I hope that it reflects not only some geographic and cultural variability, but it is similar to similar surveys conducted by both ICF and CoachSource recently. So that's who took part. Now let's look at what we can learn from this study. I'm going to do so by talking about 3 kinds of significance: theoretical, methodological, and then practical significance. So the next portion of this study is going to look at the theoretical significance. I think there's 3 or 4 slides here. And I want to explore these 4 theoretical constructs: positive psychology, positive organizational behavior, psychological capital, and character strengths. I also wanted to assess the application protocols and compliance of those constructs with global professional coaches to see if, in fact, there was a relationship. So here's my only slide in color. It's black and white on the dissertation. And to start with the upper left, positive psychology, PERMA is an acronym that's recently been used to describe positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishments. And just like my hand, positive emotions is more or less subjectively defined, but the other 4 are objectively defined by the research. Since 1998, there's been a massive shift in published studies. Prior to that, 65% of them were negative and focused on anxiety and depression and evil and all kinds of important things. Subsequently, from 1998, Seligman and others have defined this theoretical construct. So you may hear more about it. So, and I use that in the Group A training for those who identified themselves as being inclined to use positive psychology in their workforce. The other aspect that I included in my Group A training is positive organizational behavior, the upper right. Luthans and others looked at, well, what's the effect not only at individual levels, but at organizational levels? How do we make sure that the work we're doing is measurable and state-like and demonstrates performance impact? Luthans is the one that I'll credit with talking about the competitive advantage and the ROI of any psychological intervention. When I read him 2 or 3 years ago, a light bulb clicked. It was the first time I'd heard a psychologist or a researcher talk about ROI, so I leaned forward. And that led to the subtitle in this dissertation. The bottom left, PsyCap or psychological capital, is fascinating to me. Hope, efficacy, resiliency, and optimism are 4 subdomains, and they can be remembered easily with the acronym HERO. Luthans and others call it the hero within. This is thought to be that infinite potential that we all have. And in fact, it's been quantified, and I'll speak to that in a minute. The US military is teaching resilience. Schools have defined opportunities for all of these to be taught. It's fascinating, the applications in business and organization and governments. Which leads to the 4th theoretical framework, character strengths. These 6 domains, wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence, are kind of like the inner core of virtues. And then around them are 24 character strengths associated with each of these. These have been cross-culturally validated, and for me, they provide a glossary of framework. If I've emailed you, you might have seen in my email signature, it articulates what my top 5 character strengths are. Well, coaches need vocabulary words. We all had vocabulary words in 8th grade in English class, I guess, but that's one way in which this theoretical framework could be applied. The second way is with assessments. So I used 2 assessments. I've already mentioned this. And this is a bit of a busy slide. So the far left is the number of responses. And the first 2 bars look at how many coaches said, yeah, I took the VIA assessment. If you recall, this has 72 items, and most of them, 92%, said, yeah, I took it. And then the second question was, how many of you have encouraged your coachee to complete the VIA 72 assessment and save their top 5 signature strengths in your notes? Similar question, but about the coachees. And sadly, only 76%, 43 people, said yes. And I said that wrong. 76% said no, that they hadn't done it. Well, this includes the participants in Group B as well as Group A, but there are 119 responses here. So there's a discrepancy between what coaches are doing for themselves and what coaches are doing for their coachees. And I think that is an example of one of the protocols that could be adopted in the future. Another protocol is based on VIA strengths. For this population, I know from 135 responses from those coaches that these are the top 5. Remember, there are 24 signature strengths. These are the top 5 signature strengths for this group. Self-regulation and humility are important for this sample population of coaches. Well, that leads to a number of questions or opportunities for protocol. We could encourage validated assessments, such as these. We could also encourage the PsyCap questionnaire, even though I didn't see changes. I also didn't train for PsyCap content, so I wouldn't expect to see any changes. Coaches could use validated assessments. Coaches could have outcomes that are tied to some of these 4 theoretical constructs. The interactions have not been well researched yet, so there's massive opportunities for more research. And third, we can look at interventions. PPIs, positive psychology interventions, can be related to theoretical constructs. Let me give you a simple example. Let's imagine that Doug is good at self-regulation and humility, and there's a coachee who needs to develop self-regulation and humility. Well, maybe Doug would be a good match for that coach. So this is a time where the theoretical significance could be used not only for coach selection and matching, but also for interventions if that coachee needs to develop those signature strengths. So we talked a little bit about the theoretical significance. Second thing I wanted to talk about is the methodological, and the third will be the practical. So methodologically, I wanted to replicate similar studies by these guys. These are the closest that I could find. Grant and McKee, I think it's pronounced that way. He's from Australia. And they have quasi-experimental research over 3 months. So I thought, wow, this is a reasonable amount of time. Maybe we could do this without getting methodologically in the way of the work that coaches are doing every day. And secondly, I wanted to introduce application of an evidence-based coaching protocol, the AD-FITTM model. So let me explain it a bit. This is an approach to positive psychology coaching, and the A stands for awareness. What are my strengths, and do I have a growth mindset? A growth mindset is known to be a predictor of coachability and our capacity to learn, in contrast to a fixed mindset. I've got a fixed mindset about, I don't know, martial arts. I'm not going to learn a martial art. But if I've got a growth mindset about learning the AD-FITTM model, then that'll shift my expectation for achievement. B is defining a meaningful goal or outcome. I didn't provide a list for this study, but I have used these for decades and have outcomes for my clients. And C is what do we want to focus on in this session? I is the evidence-based interventions. T are the takeaways. And the F and the I and the T are commonly a structure that I use in every coaching session. The last aspect of this is the percent of compliance. So I wanted to test this. Well, one way to test it is used by Grant, who asked a goal attainment survey question, the GAS. And this is a question that's pretty simple. It's a little bit like the Net Promoter Score is used in other realms. How successful has your coachee been in attaining meaningful performance goals thus far on a scale from 1 to 10? So you're asking the coachee, how successful has your coachee been? And as you'd expect, it's positively skewed. The average here is 7.9, and there were 46 respondents to this question. And yet, this is not a protocol. It's not incorporated commonly into coaching engagements. It could be, certainly, because we'd expect that there would be a degree of goal attainment. We'd also expect that there'd be some compliance over time. So this is hard to read the y-axis, but what I'm looking for here is an average reinforcement of strengths or outcomes from 1 to 10 over 6 different coaching sessions. So I asked a similar question 6 times. So there's a slight variance in this scale from 3.6 to 3.9, but generally this is pretty flat, which indicates, and there were 42 respondents, there's no evidence of a fatigue effect, at least over those 6 sessions for this sample population. Naturally, I'm going to recommend we need more research to look at compliance. It's a factor in lots of other examples of protocols in other domains, but not clear from this one. So I needed to ask more questions. I needed to ground the study a little bit deeper by asking 3 open text questions. These are not, I should back up maybe, these are not qualitative and as deep as a qualitative research study. They were simply asked so that I could explore these 3 things. What's the specific benefit, if any, that coaching has had on your coachees' performance outcomes? And I gave them examples such as key performance indicators or business goals. So the dissertation has pages of these results. But what I did naturally is to categorize them by themes and code the terms that you see reflected here. And I just gave you one example of performance outcomes. So productivity was mentioned by 28 of the 100 respondents. The key terms are related to productivity. They're listed there. And two examples are, for instance, he raised the team productivity by 20% in the last 3 months. Boom. Well, I wouldn't have gotten that from a quantitative only study. So I'm delighted that I asked these questions. And another example is she has taken steps to advance a project that had been on hold, moving nearer to completion. Productivity is one performance outcome. There are others. I should probably tell you the top two were productivity and focus. And I asked a similar question about behaviors. What are the top behaviors that that your coachee has demonstrated as a result of this work in the last 90 days? Same approach, looked at thematic categories and identified key terms and provided some examples. There were 115 responses here, and relationships was number one. The terms included words like trusting and empathy and mentors and stakeholders and sponsors. And one example is the language is edited a little bit, but it's client is intentionally building relationships with other leaders across the organization. She defined key stakeholders and mentors. I'll tell you that this is one of the most common examples of relationship building that my clients have endeavored to achieve over decades. The top two were relationship building and effectiveness. The third question that I asked that was open text was, what are some examples of performance or behavioral outcomes that your coachee has attained in the last 3 months? And the top two there were self-care, which delighted me because I think we can all demonstrate more self-care. And secondly, rewards. So I'm happy that I asked those open text questions because they lead to practical applications. This is the third way in which I looked at significance. And I was provoked, I hinted at this, I was provoked by Luthans and others who said that they had found a return on investment of a 90-minute digital intervention designed to develop PsyCap, which remember is hope, efficacy, resiliency, and optimism for business leaders. Oh, that impressed me. And they did a bunch of estimates to say that, well, the ROI of that short 90-minute intervention was 270%. That got my attention. So I wanted to do a similar thing in 60 minutes that maybe would be evidence-based and provide a practical protocol for global coaches. And I wasn't sure if that could be done across cultural variables. And third bullet, I wanted to assess the goal attainment scale. I wanted to look at performance outcomes and behavior outcomes of leaders. And I wanted to get at this question of, well, is there a practical competitive advantage? We hear coaches marketing their services all the time. What does that really mean? So I'm looking at the incorporation of the AD-FITT model as one example of a positive psychology coaching protocol. And I'm looking now at the number of respondents on the left side. And as you'd expect, there's a pretty flat distribution. Group A may be the two bars on the far right, folks who are incorporating something like AD-FITT into their work. And the far left, the 0 to 40%, might be the group B, but I really couldn't confirm that. So I had to do a between groups ANOVA study to look at what was that mean score. And if you look at it this way, it's a marginal difference. The mean here is 7.9. The difference between the two groups isn't clear. So I had to do a deeper analysis of between groups ANOVA. And I'm looking now at that 0 to 40% group on the left and the 60 to 100% group on the right, and took out the middle group of 40 to 60% to try to define two groups, a low compliance group and a high compliance group, and to look at the goal attainment scale, the mean score on the left. And I should note that I changed the scale on the left, so I'm exaggerating the impact as if it were massive. It wasn't massive. The difference here is only 0.22, if you can read the small numbers. And sadly, it was not statistically significant. I suppose we all look for statistical significance. This assessment did not lead to statistical significance. My conclusion here is that the F value is not very big. Therefore, there's not a big between groups variance. There's not a large enough effect size. There's not enough cases. There were only 41 responses here to be statistically significant. The participants who adopted the positive psychology protocol of compliance with the AD-FITTM model, in other words, those on the bar on the right, did report slightly higher goal attainment scales on the left. So it's directionally important, but not statistically significant. So one recommendation, obviously, we need more research to explore that statistical relationship between coaching protocols and leader outcomes. And I'd argue we need larger populations. We need more than 1 hour of exposure to a digital treatment before we can make any more conclusive statements. Well, if you're a practical person and you want to see what the competitive advantage is, you might want a bit of a summary. So here you go. The implications of this study. This sort of mirrors the research questions, and I'm wrapping up. So point one, there is a relationship between participation in professional coaching and leader outcomes. Evidence for that was not only in the open text, but in the goal attainment scale. Two, there is a relationship between the coaching protocols and performance or behavioral outcomes, as I just mentioned. And three, there is not a statistically significant relationship between compliance to at least one positive psychology coaching protocol and performance or behavioral outcomes. So, massive conclusion. There may be a competitive market advantage for developing positive psychology protocols. I think we need more research in particular ways, and I'll mention those in the next slide. Assessments and defining meaningful outcomes and using the goal attainment score and compliance with AD-FIT are examples of ways in which we could do that. So, the limitations of the study, I've hinted at the sample size. Collecting a representative study from 53,000 people was a challenge. I sent out invitations to about 1% of them, over 5,000, which maybe was a pretty good sample size, but I was only able to get 223 to participate in time one and 54 to participate in both time one and time two. That sample size is what it is and could always be larger. Generalizability naturally is another limitation. It's a quasi-experimental design. There's opportunities for defining two separate groups and looking at protocols that could be applied to high or low compliance for those two groups in other research, but that's beyond the scope of this study. Third, the inclusion criteria. I wanted to include 6 inclusion criteria that would attract a sufficient number of people without getting in the way of their practice as coaches. And there's no way to know how many potential participants dropped out of this survey. They could have read the invitation, chosen not to participate. I have no idea how many did that. I do know that 120 people completed the time 1 survey and then did not complete the time 2 survey. So thankfully 54 did so. So further research with a longitudinal study with one intact group and survey exit questions could be a good idea in the future. Methodologically, I needed to honor the confidential nature of professional coaching and make sure that whatever survey I could conduct would not in any negative way affect the work that they were doing with whomever they were working with. Ethically, professionally, there are important reasons for those methodological controls. And I think there's no reason to assume that it was a problem. I maybe am overstating this, but when I look at the open text responses, they seem to indicate that people were able to participate in significant ways. Well, I wanted to chunk the recommendations into 2 different groups to remind everybody who's an academic or a practitioner that there are both sides of that river that we can bridge. So further research could have longitudinal research with controls, such as the ones listed here. There could be replication with larger sample populations. I've never observed a defense where somebody didn't say, of course we need larger sample studies, and of course we need more research. Third, there's very little research right now on positive psychology interventions, a specific intervention, and a coaching protocol. A classic example is there's some protocols called person activity fit, and they look at what should be best for that person with that need. A commonly used example is gratitude, and the expression of gratitude is thought to be an important part of positive psychology. But not always. In fact, folks in grief or in denial of their grief should not be doing a gratitude journal or some other positive psychology intervention. So that is an area that's ripe for research. Competitively, I think coaches could begin to use more validated assessments that include the use of positive psychology protocols. I've mentioned 2 of them in this study, and they're tremendous. Second example is that outcome-based coaching could become a norm. It is in other professions, from healthcare and law and finance, some with critical needs. It's not yet for leader development. And I think that raises ethical and professional challenges. Point 6, we could adopt outcome-based protocols such as the AD-FITTM coaching protocol in the future. So my phones are ringing. That means it's time to say, do you have any questions? And thank you for your curiosity, your love of learning, and hope.
Thank you so much, Doug. Great job. And I'm just going to go straight to the questions from your committee. We'll start with Dr. Morris.
Thank you very much. Great job, Doug. It's been a pleasure to work with you through this and reading your writing and research around this. And I know that it's very, very important to your work and as a professional and your growth as a researcher. I have a few interesting questions, I think. And one of these, at least one I know you're going to anticipate. So were there any differences across the demographic lines that you have, or even how you slice the data? So I'm thinking, did you see differences with gender? Maybe since you collected information about location, primary location, did we see any differences there? Or even from the sources, from the coaching organizations, did we see any differences between groups that way?
I wasn't able to associate a response from somebody in Europe with their gender because I wasn't able to track that user ID individually. I looked at aggregated data. So that's a limitation of the study. But what I will say is that these results mirrored very similar gender and demographic data from 2 other groups, from the International Coaching Federation's global study and from CoachSource's global study. So it seems like it's similar, but no, I was not able to track the specifics that you just asked about.
All right. So I'm thinking back to when you went through, I guess, the hypotheses and the one where there's no statistical relationship between compliance to PPC and the performance behavioral outcomes, right?
Yep.
So why is that?
Why is that? Well, one answer is that it's hard to track, and I wasn't able to track individuals or their responses. I was not able to create 2 discrete groups like you would in an experimental study. So I've got Group A and Group B. Now I'm not sure that Group A is the high compliance group, but I think that they might be. And I'm not sure that Group B is the low compliance group, but I think that they might be. So the short answer is I don't have 2 discrete groups that I can compare. Wish I did.
All right. 2 more. I want you to talk a little bit about your design choice, because I know we had multiple conversations about this before we went through with this, and I know we were deciding about, are you going to do something that has a T1 and T2? And I think this is not only to highlight at least your thought process in this, but also for students, as you mentioned in your presentation, who may be considering doing something that has sort of a longitudinal or quasi-experimental design. Can you walk us through your thought process around that and why you decided that was the right way to go?
Yeah, happy to. And the kid who you're looking at 2 years ago was a different kid. So at that time, I thought it was a good idea, right? I should also say that I did a longitudinal study in the 90s as part of my graduate work at Dartmouth. So I kind of like the idea of a longitudinal study, and I like the idea of not getting in the way of coaches. And I wanted to figure out, well, what is it that coaches are doing that that might have a competitive advantage? That was, as you know, the key question. So how do you do that? Well, you can't get in their way. You can't ask their coachees, really, to participate in this study. You can't ask their employers. You can't ask, like a mini survey is another tactic that I do with organizational clients. Let me explain that because you'd like this. So let's imagine that Doug's coaching George, and George is looking for some behavioral outcome over the 6-month investment. And at some point in this investment, maybe the 60% point, we do a mini survey and we ask George to ask 6 or 10 of his people, to what extent have I improved my capacity to articulate the vision for our organization, or whatever it is that he's working on? And they'll say 1 to 10, and they'll provide that feedback immediately. It's a very short mini survey. Marshall Goldsmith is a proponent of this. And the net result is that we're able to look at behavioral changes that are reinforced and observed by everybody around George who thinks that George really ought to benefit from coaching. Well, that's a marvelous approach. In fact, some say that it's more effective to do that at multiple times in a 6-month engagement than to do a pre and a post, or to look at outcomes. Brian Underhill and some of those researchers at CoachSource are passionate about that protocol. So I'm inclined to use some kind of a longitudinal assessment, but it had to be short and it couldn't get in the way. And I don't know if I answered your question. Did I answer it?
You're there. I think that's fine. And my last question is, you said one of the statistics that excited you when you looked at this research was that Luthen's work about the return on investment being 270%. That seems pretty extraordinary, right? If you had to then turn around and quantify your own work in that way, where would it be on that spectrum?
Oh, I'd love to say 450%, right? There's a bunch of hogwash out there that talks about return on investment, and Dr. Maddox and I are this deep with some folks at who have strong opinions about how to measure return on investment. An example is Jack and Patty Phillips at the ROI Institute. This is a trend, but it's not yet the norm, and it's not being implemented in coaching, sadly. So there are people who will claim that they're providing 200, 400, 600% ROI. Really? How is that quantified? And what percent of this outcome are you attributing directly to coaching? So there's an adjusted ROI, which is what I use. If, for instance, you invest $6,000 in a small business owner, invest that amount in 6 months of coaching, and you achieve, say, a $10,000 yield, you could say, well, there's a net $4,000 yield, but if only 10% of that $4,000 is attributed to coaching, we're down to what? $1,000. Well, the ROI plummets. ROI is not being used now. I hope it will be. We've got capacity. We're using predictive ROI in software better than we are like when we purchase stuff on Amazon and when we talk to Siri, better than we are when we're interacting in leader development programs. I think that's sad. I think we've got room to catch up. And that's about all I know.
Thank you. Those are all my questions for now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to Dr. Maddox.
Okay, thank you. Doug, congratulations on many levels here. First of all, for just being intellectually curious enough to say, I have a question and I want to go solve it with research, and maybe I can get a degree along the way. And congratulations for taking that and struggling with what your design would be and not cowing to the idea of something that was complex. Striving to do both quantitative and some qualitative work in it. And to do time 1 and time 2, so you have a longitudinal design. This is a good example for other students of not to shy away from something that might be difficult. So I'm proud of the work that you've done for this, and happy to be part of it with you. Couple quick questions for you. To get back to that intellectual curiosity, does coaching improve performance? What does your dissertation say?
Right. Research question 1. There's 2 ways to answer. The dissertation says that there's no statistically significant yes answer to that question. There are, however, related open text box examples, several hundred of them in those 3 questions, that indicate that there is a relationship between coaching and leader outcomes. There's also Doug's experience, but that's not related.
Okay, so your experience, as well as the quantitative information, indicates that there probably is an effect. But your results don't show that. If you had to redesign this, what would you do to make the study better so that you could see a larger effect?
Yeah, I would love to have been able to assign user IDs and identities to Group A and Group B and to track them over time. I would have loved to have been able to provide reminders. I provided a generic reminder at 30 days and 60 days, but it essentially was the same reminder to Group A and Group B, and it said, please remember to be included in the study and to continue to do the good work with your clients. It said something shorter than that, but that was the gist. I would have loved to have been able to help nudge those who self-identified as implementing positive psychology protocols a little bit more, so it becomes an ongoing, say, 90-day training period. But I couldn't do any of that. I couldn't track them. I couldn't track them as discrete groups. And a limitation that I didn't address earlier is that the only way to track them was to ask them at T1, would you be willing to provide your email address, so that I could provide at T2 that survey. Well, that leads to some attrition, and I think it is normal. That cascading effect is probably the only way to deal with the ethical limitations of the study, and I appreciate the expertise from all 3 of you to do it that way. But I would have loved to have 2 intact groups to compare what, if any, effect those protocols might have had on leader outcomes. And I think we're at the, I don't know, the base of a mountain. Pick your metaphor. We haven't gone far up this mountain yet. And I think that there'll be tremendous opportunities to implement protocols ahead. The coaching profession needs them. It's only a 20-year-old profession. Did I answer your question?
You did. There was one thing that I thought you left out that I know you and I have talked about, and that is making the intervention stronger, so that the effect is larger. And looking at some of the work that you've done, say, with a healthcare company, is there a chance to see what coaching they've done in the past and what those outcomes look like, and the coaching that you're doing with them now with AD-FITTM, and comparing the outcomes before and the outcomes now? Might that be an effective study, because you're now controlling how intense the AD-FITTM application is?
The short answer is you bet, and I'd love to. The long answer is I haven't yet had that opportunity to, but I've continued to ask. This is a 1-hour treatment. Group A had a different treatment for 1 hour than Group B. But other than that, this is a quasi-experimental study that looked at one group of coaches. I would love that opportunity. Not only with healthcare. Yes.
Okay. All right. One last question for you. What's next?
Well, Wiley doesn't seem to need another book on coaching, so I'm not sure that this dissertation is going to lead to another book. I've published a book before, a couple books, but I think what's next is digital training for the masses. The coaching profession, I think, is hungry for some validated protocols, and there are ways in which that can be distributed to others. We'll see.
Okay.
Thank you. You know, the problem with going last is some of my questions have already been asked, so I was just going over my notes. But I'm going to ask you a philosophical question, which might seem a little quirky to you, but it's important to me, especially in the medical profession, which is, and I'll explain in a minute. But so as a coach and a researcher now, you've argued that your profession would benefit from incorporating validated psychology protocols, right? That there needs to be evidence-based protocols infused into your field. This is similar to, 20 years ago in medicine, physicians were first hearing that they should be using evidence-based protocols to reduce infections, for example. And so here's my question to you. Do you believe that coaching is an art or a science, or is it both? And again, the reason why I'm asking is that the medical profession was asked the same question about 20 years ago, and there was a very strong argument that it's as much of an art as it is a science 20 years ago. So where do you stand on that, just philosophically?
So I want to say both, and then I flip and I want to say science, because this is an academic endeavor, and I've become more scientifically oriented. And then I want to flip and say art, because when I follow my impulse in a coaching engagement, I can be more artful and responsive to that individual. So I think it's all the above, and it depends a lot on the strengths of that coach and the needs for that client. I'm guessing that healthcare is more advanced in the protocols that we now have. Hand washing and reducing infection is a classic example, because there were critical outcomes if we didn't. We didn't know that physicians who didn't wash their hands increased infection to the degree that they do. But now we do, and we can mandate that, and we can require it, and we can reward those who adopt those protocols. So similarly, we don't know the negative consequences of using the wrong positive psychology intervention. I gave you a classic example of giving somebody a gratitude journal as an intervention when they're dealing with grief or suicidal or PTSD. Really? Do we know if that's a good idea? And if in fact, you may know that those cultures with the highest happiness factors also have the highest suicide factors. The Scandinavian countries are a good example of this. So if we do the wrong thing and it leads to suicide, what does that mean? So I'm not dodging your question. I'm only to say it's more complex than I would have thought. I want to go with both.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think, speaking, from the medical perspective, physicians used to say, "Oh, you're forcing me to do cookbook medicine." That was something that people said a lot, because they felt that the art of medicine was very important. So I think that's a fair answer, and you pointed out that this is really only 20 years old, so it's got a long way to go, hopefully. So great answer. Thank you for that. I guess so. Just one kind of technical question. Your AD-FITT model, so that is what you incorporated into the 60-minute digital treatment. That was part of the protocol, correct?
That's part of what I incorporated.
Your model. There
were 4, I think, maybe 6, in both, 4 or 6 links, and they added up to 60 minutes. So AD-FITT was one of them. PERMA, some information about the PERMA model from Seligman, some information about signature strengths. And some of these were very short, like a 60 or 90-second whiteboard animation, kind of a video. And others were longer. A course that I created that was maybe 10 minutes. It would take longer. And then some were YouTube videos and some were slide-based. So the intention here was to provide 6 of these, and then I asked, I clustered them on matching ways so that these were strongly recommended and these were recommended. And then I asked in the follow-up questions, to what extent did you complete the 4 strongly recommended, whether they were in Group A or Group B? And so, yes, AD-FIT was part of it, but no, it wasn't.
Right. I see. Okay, thanks for clarifying that. And so just in continuation of Dr. Maddox's question about what would you do differently, would you alter the digital intervention at all if you were to do this differently? Would you have a different type of intervention that you would deploy? Or, you know, was there any impact of that, do you think, on the outcome of your study?
It's
For
a good
example,
question.
60 minutes
Right.
too long.
That's right. That's the core question, right? It's only 60 minutes. So I guess one short answer is it might be prudent to have another study that had repeated measures, and it could be a series of, say, a 60-minute or a 30-minute units that were able to either test to what extent did you comply or take these things, or actually assess it using digital tracking devices so that we can know if George says that he took the thing, that he actually took the thing. I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
I don't think there's anything really difficult or problematic about the content that I created or selected. It was easy for folks to take, and there's plenty of examples of digital training that's being used in all of our lives. So I don't think that was unfamiliar to anybody.
Sure, sure. Okay, so this is my very last question. I know we're going a little bit late here, but you know, we do have some students on the line that have been listening in. Having now just completed your defense, what advice or recommendations would you have for students on the journey?
Oh, lean on your committee, ask a million questions so that they, you know, get tired of hearing from you. Know that the process is longer than you could possibly imagine, and deeper than you could possibly imagine. And stay focused, perhaps, on whatever your outcome is. I'm an outcome-based guy, so I don't know if that's useful.
Great.
Reach out to me. Let me know
you.
whatever your questions might be. I'd be glad to be a resource in the future.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And with that, just as a bridge, we do have, you know, as I said, some individuals on the phone. Are there any questions from the others in the audience for Doug? Or have we exhausted him with all of our questions?
These are, I see, sent a text. I've met Sean Acker, and he's not only charismatic and clever and witty and all that, but he's also generous. And I'd encourage you to look at his community. Is it Good Think or Think? Whatever it is.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, thumbs up.
Great job, Doug. Doug's contact information is in the chat box there for anybody who wants to connect with him. And so hearing no other questions or comments, I think we'll end this session. And thank you so much for joining us here today on this very exciting event and informative event. And we'll let you all disconnect.